Mama, we made it, guys. We are back with the Guest List podcast. I am honored today to have this guest on the show. After I was given the opportunity to talk with her, I did a little bit of a background and research, and man, there's a huge list. If I read everything off that she's accomplished, we'd probably be here for half of the conversation. So I'm just going to name off a few. She's the Executive Director of the Elaine Wynn Family Foundation. During her time at MGM, she assisted in building MGM Resorts International into one of the top 50 most diverse companies in the country. She recently co-founded her own nonprofit called Delivering with Dignity, which delivers home-cooked meals to families in Las Vegas and is expanding outwards. And she is the founder of her own company, which is known as Punam Mathur LLC, speaker, writer, and trainer. So without further ado, Punam Mathur.
That's a lot of pressure. I'm still writing that thing, Jake. I'm still working to add some more stuff.
Man, yeah. I was going to say, I could even mention I saw a top 100 influential woman in Las Vegas in 2014, 2015, and all of the different committees and task forces along the way.
So that's what happens. The older you get, the more you do. That's what it means. That's what it means.
Yeah. As I was looking and watching a bunch of your YouTube videos, especially right before this, that's something that interested me is your speaking ability and your presence on the stage and how you incorporate the people who have assisted you along the way or the people that you're helping along the way. I think that speaks very large testament to your character, along with just the simple laundry list of accomplishments and accolades.
So I think this conversation is going to go really well. I'm just going to let you do all the talking. This is working. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. So let me give you a way to, let me offer a view. Because I deeply believe this, is that, there's 7.8 billion on the planet, right? And no two have the same native gifts in the same combination. There's no two. And even if two did, then the life experience that is unique to each of us makes us absolutely unique and completely spectacular. So for me, it's about naming and claiming those native gifts. And I don't think many of us actually spend time on that. It's not something that, we are not taught to inventory what is good about ourselves, right? Mm-hmm. And what we naturally do is inventory all the ways in which we fall short. So at the end of every night, at the end of every day, I go to sleep and I'm like, oh, here's all the ways I didn't make it. Here's all the ways I wasn't perfect. Here's all the dumb things I said. Here's the things I wish I had done or wish I'd said. That's sort of the way in which most of us roll. And so for me, that's kind of opposite, right? So you, Jake, 7.8 billion on the planet, no one has what you do. So what I really want is for you to name and claim those native gifts and then just wake up every morning looking for ways to express them in the world, to make the world a better place, because only you can make that contribution, right?
Yes.
And so here's something about trying to figure out what those native gifts are. So we're born with them, right? So that's one premise. We are born with them. So it's not like we get new ones. We don't replace our native gifts. We are born. One time we got our native gifts. So here are the three things that tell you it's a native gift. One, it is effortless. So when I'm doing the thing that I'm born to do, it is effortless because I'm born to do it. Two, I am excellent. Whatever it is, if that is my gift, when I'm expressing that gift, there's an effortlessness and an excellence in how I show up. And then third, it's also been true your whole life, right? And so one quiz for me is if you're trying to figure out what my native gifts are. We don't have muscle. We're not sort of conditioned and socialized to name and claim those things and then be accountable for sharing them, right? And so whatever it was that was true when you were 5, whatever it was that was true when you were 15, whatever it was that was true when you were 25, 35, 45, it's the same gifts, born one time. So what are they, right? So for me, I used to get a lot of detentions for chatting it up in class, right? Who knew? But if I look back, that was true. I always have had lots of stuff to say and never needed to have it written down. It just sort of came. So it got me detentions, right, as the 5-year-old, as a 10-year-old. Then it served me really well in student council, right? Then it served me in leadership positions. It served me in government affairs. It served me. So it's the same native gifts. We're born but one time. We have one deck of native gifts. And the challenge, I think, for all of us is to name and claim them. And remember that when you're expressing your native gift, it is effortless. You are excellent. And when you go to sleep at night, you're reminded why you were born. There's a sense of profound fulfillment. And so we can overcomplicate all kinds of stuff. We're like, oh, I need to be this. No, you don't. Claim who you are and get really clear. And so sometimes it's, I actually went back to my family and said, what were the things that when you saw me doing them when I was little, when did I light up? Like, Mom, tell me, sisters that I grew up with. And it took me going back to say, okay, I am now sort of more clear about what my few native gifts are. Let me name them and claim them. And then every experience that I've had in my life just allows me to get more competent at how to use them in the world, right? How to use them for best and highest use. And that's sort of what I do today, is so that I don't now have to pretend that I got stuff I don't, right? And just because, and we're very capable, and we can all do a ton of different stuff. And so I can be pretty competent at the things that aren't my native gift. And what that means is it is not effortless. I will never achieve excellence. And when I go to sleep at night, I don't have a sense of fulfillment. I have a sense of exhaustion. Right. Wow. So just because we can do other stuff doesn't mean that that's what we're born to do. And so for me, I'm like, let me name and claim mine. I'm going to be accountable for those. And then I'm going to really be curious about helping others name and claim theirs, so that when we team, we're like really playing some Division A ball, right? You're the punter, I'm the runner, you're the quarterback. Let's do this thing. And then everyone will be accountable for what it is they've got. So that was a very long way of, I've always done a lot of talking. Temporary speaking, it got me detentions in the third grade. It has served me very well professionally. I get paid to do it. Just crazy.
The term native gift is that's something unique I've never heard of before. I kind of take a little bit of a twist to it. I call things specialized knowledge or skill stacking along the way, where you've discovered along the way all the different things that you've done in life. You know, whether you're an entrepreneur or a speaker, or you like to volunteer work. You start understanding yourself along the way. So you find your niche, and it becomes so specialized that no one else can replicate it besides you. But
and I would observe that you were born unreplicatable. Like that's how we were born, right? So it's never changed. I was born with one set of native gifts. And so that's one of mine that I've claimed, is this extemporaneous speaking. When I do it, it's effortless, right? It comes easy to me. And when I get to do it, I go to sleep at night, I've got a sense of fulfillment. It's been true my whole life. Changed in how it showed up as I learned more, as I sort of discovered how to use it in ways that work. Like it. Another one is sort of bringing people together, right? I was the one. My mother tells a story. Like, we moved from India when I was 6, and so my 7th birthday was like 3 weeks after we landed in Canada, right? So we know nobody, and it's January, so we were on Christmas break. I go back. I've got like my first 2 days of school in Canada, coming fresh off the boat from India, right? And my mother tells the story that I turned 7. That day I'm at school and I'm telling everyone, I just invited them all over to my house for a birthday party. Like, my mother had no idea. After school, I'm like, hi, my name's Punam, and it's my birthday today, and I'd like you to come, right? I've always just done that, right? Always just convened people. It's just something that I was like born to do. So that's how it showed up when I was 6. It worked very well in high school. I was editor of the yearbook. I was the student council. Like, I did all of that in college. Same thing. I was involved with sorority, just bringing people together. As a corporate executive, that was my job, right? Is to bring people together. So I've learned how to use that in different ways, right? Every experience has given me an opportunity to discover its utility in my life. But those native gifts are ones that we're born with. So it's just about claiming them, not discovering them. We've always had them. So if you get curious, there are things that you are absolutely spectacular at. And the measure is, when I do it, is it effortless? Am I excellent? Do I go to sleep that night with a profound sense, a reminder why I was born, right? Those are 3 things that must be true. The other thing that's true is it's always been true. Your whole life it's been true. The people that have known you for the longest will be like, yep, when you do that, you light up. That's when your light's the brightest, right?
So when you... I guess you discovered this term, your native gift. Was there an sort of epiphany moment that you realized that these skills were harnessed by yourself and that you were able to scale it outwards? Was there a specific moment or thought or experience that assisted you with culminating this theory?
I've got a memory of what I think when that seed was planted, and it's such a fuzzy memory. My father he passed away 40 some years ago. It's been a long time, but he was a chemical engineering professor. And so I'm the oldest of three girls in Western Canada. That's where we grew up. And he had a lot of wisdom that he offered, but there was always science underneath it because he was a scientist, right? And so I remember getting a lesson from him about, and it was, and I got to tell you the whole story. I was walking home from school. I was probably 9, and there were kids on the other side of the street who were lobbing words that I could tell were intended to be hurtful. And they were. And it had to do with the color of my skin. And so we grew up middle class. I was not sort of introduced to, I didn't know I was different until that day. And it hurt. And so I went sobbing home. My mom was there and sort of consoled me. And she said what she said a lot, which is, wait till your papa gets home. So that night, he gets home and they whisper, download my trauma in the kitchen. And then he comes out and he's got a yellow pad and a sharpened pencil. And I know I'm going to get a science lesson, right? So that day, the science lesson was about the biology of me, how my body was built. So there's flesh, and then there's an epidural layer, and in between, there's this thing called pigment. Right? There's this thing called pigment. And so that was the biology of me. So I got the construction of my body. And then he said, now here's the chemistry of it. When pigment interfaces with the sun, it gets dark. So that's the biology and the chemistry, and that's how you build. And then he sort of pushed the yellow pad aside, and I then knew that the wisdom portion of the lesson was coming. And the wisdom portion was as follows. He said, look, all of us are built in, call it God's workshop, right? And it's even bigger than Santa's, which was like mind-blowing for a 9-year-old. Like, that's a massive place. He said, so picture a lineup. There's just hundreds and hundreds of different lineups in front of God as he's putting human beings together. And each of those lineups corresponds to a different gift or skill that he's going to give just the people that line up. So Punam, there must have been a lineup for pigment. And when you got to the head of that lineup, boy, was he glad to see you. He just kept giving and giving, right? So you've got this gift that is pigment. And then just to make it really concrete for me, he used the example of my best friend, Melissa Branyan, who was a very fair-complected, like redhead. And when the 6 sunny days a year in Western Canada, when it was sunny, you could almost hear a popcorn sound, and it was the freckles on her nose and the top of her cheeks that would just pop, right? And so he says to me, Melissa was in that lineup, but he must have been busy when she got to the head of the line. He didn't give her very much. He said to her, next. So that's all Melissa got, right? So I was like, I get it. The whole thing made sense. The biology of me, the chemistry of pigment, and then how I was built as a human being. I go flying into show and tell the next day, fling my arms out, make my proclamation. So confused my teacher, she called my mother and said, what'd you say to her? Because she flung her arms into the air and proclaimed herself to be the world's largest freckle. So that was the seed. And since then, I actually believe that that's how we're built. Now, so the pigment one was a very specific way for a dad to help a daughter who was going through some trauma in that moment, right? But I really think that's the way it works. I mean, all of us are in different lineups. All of us get different amounts of that native gift or that skill, that whatever it is that we're born to do. And our life, like sort of our job as human beings, is to name and claim those things, right? And then just wake up every day looking for ways to express them in the world to make the world a better place. The one other thing that since that seed, the other thing that I think I've learned is that we're also the only critter in the universe that has free agency and free will, right?
Yes.
Lizards are kind of reflexive. Dolphins are kind of reflexive. But we've got free agency and free will, which also means I've got the superpower of my own volume control on how I express my gift. And what I've learned is that every single weakness that has showed up in my life, every single weakness, when I look at it, is actually simply one of my native gifts over amplified, right? So for me, communication, I claim it. That for me is one of the native gifts that I believe I've been given. And when it's over amplified, it means I don't always listen, right? I can see big picture. I've always had the ability to find the simplicity in whatever the complexity is. It was true when I was 5, true when I was 15. It served me very well as a corporate executive. I can sort of cut to it to see in the bombardment of detail what the simple pattern might be, right? I can find the simplicity. So when I over-amplify that, sometimes I just ride roughshod over the details, right? I can oversimplify. And so the practice for me has been learning how to sort of control my volume to maintain it as a gift, right? I think of people, I'm not terribly detail oriented. Like I've learned, but it ain't my native gift. Like it is effortless. I'm not excellent, and it's exhausting, right? I can do it because you have to succeed. And what I've discovered is that I always, on a team, want to find someone for whom that's their native gift. And then I got to help them watch their volume, because someone who has a natural native gift in detail orientation, if it's over amplified, they become a micromanaging pain in the ass.
Right? Yes, that's the worst. It's the worst.
Exactly. So it's about, first name and claim those gifts, and then get really curious about how the amplification. Because I don't believe that there are any lineups in that workshop that were made. I don't believe there's any lineups for less thans or weaknesses or broken people. I just don't. My fundamental worldview is that all 7.8 billion of us are some spectacular combination of native gifts and skills. And our job is to name and claim them, to be accountable and to own the volume, and then look for ways to express them in the world to make the world a better place, because no one else can make that contribution.
I love that analogy and that metaphor, because it's a like you said, it's a more simplistic way to the infamous find your purpose in life. Because finding purpose is tough, but you need the skills in order to find your purpose. So if you find the skill and things that you're good at, it makes that transition to the purpose so much easier, so much simplistic.
It reveals. Your purpose reveals, right? When I'm just deploying the best of what I got, the universe sort of figures out how to use me. And then all of a sudden I'm doing things that require what I've got, which is as good as it gets.
Yes. I enjoyed that. That's, I'm gonna have to use that, the native gift. I'm gonna start using that a little bit more and adopt it, because it is much more simplistic in life. And, since you found that at a young age, I'm curious, what brought you down to Las Vegas? Since you said you'd moved to Canada since you were 7, from India. How did that transition towards Vegas go?
Yeah, so not my proudest story, but here's actually what happened. Is I was going to be the world's best special ed teacher, and my whole life I'd known that. Like, kids have always been the thing that are the coolest to me, always. So I used to volunteer with them when I was younger, until it was old enough to get a job, and then I went right into Parks and Rec the second they hired me. So that's always what I knew I was going to be. It's the world's best special ed teacher. That was my job, right? And at the university, my father was a professor. When you live with a professor right outside of campus, you don't actually look at brochures for other places. You already know the bus route, and you know where all the buildings are, right? So I knew where I was going to go. And sure enough, there I was. It was a 5-year program. And so I was going to do it in 4, because kids needed me. The world was waiting. I was impatient, going to do this in 4. So, of course, I made a deal with the head of the department, the chair. And I said, I will accelerate my classes so that I can get the Bradley credits. But there was this requirement of 2 practicums a year. Every October, every February, you'd spend as a practice teacher in 3rd, 4th, and 5th year. So I said to him, I'll do my coursework. I will do 2 years of my practicums, but I just need you to extrapolate the credit for the practicums in that 5th year. He said yes. We shook on it. Done deal. I turn around in my type A kind of way, and boom, I'm doing it all. Grabbing stuff. I'm vice president of Students Association. I'm vice president of sorority. I am living my university experience large. In March, early April, right before finals, and that what should have been my last year, I went back to him and reported that I had kept my end of the deal. All was done. I had good practicums for the 2 years I'd done them. Just extrapolate. At that point, he said to me, I can't do that. And I'm like, what? And he said, I can't, because the diploma that we issue pledges a certain amount of classroom experience. You don't have it. And I was like, so I'm 21, and you got to admit, that was some major injustice that just met me, my little life, right? So being a little bit headstrong, a whole lot impetuous, in that moment, my highest priority was I need to teach this bugger a lesson, right? And so my lesson, as smart as I was I'll teach you, I'm not showing up for finals. So I literally did not show up for finals in my 5th and final year. So I still do not, to this day, have that bachelor's degree, because that was the decision I made. So now all of a sudden, oldest of 3 girls, I'm the most likely to succeed. I've said my whole life that I was going to be the world's best special ed teacher. And effectively, I pulled my own rug out from under my feet. So I don't know what to do. I went to a counselor, And the counselor gave me a very elegant story about how sometimes, discovering what you're supposed to do is a journey, and discovery, and not everyone needs to know. And what I heard was, you should run away. Literally, that was what caused me to pack everything I owned in the back of a Honda Civic, and it was white, so I called it a molar. It was not much larger than a molar. And I remember saying to my mom, I'm going to go. And I decided to go. And I was born in the States, so I've got the ability to live both places. And Nevada had stuff happening. This was in the early to mid 80s. And it was a booming kind of place. And so I'm like, okay, I love the Pacific Ocean and the Rocky Mountains, because that's what Vancouver offered. So how about Lake Tahoe? Like, there's a mini Pacific Ocean, mini mountains. I'll go there. I went there in no shirt for finals in April. Was there in May. It snowed. And I was like, I'm not far enough south. So that was the highly strategic plan that caused me to roll into this community now 35 years ago. And the first 2 years that I lived here, I was broke, totally miserable. I mean, I had this idyllic block party neighborhood kind of life. And when you come to Las Vegas with very little money, right, you're living in places that are a little bit sketchy. Mm-hmm. It was so far beyond anything I was prepared for. But being the oldest, right, too stubborn, pride, I just stuck it out. And so that first 2 years, I delivered the RJ to eat. I was mowing grass. Like, I bought a Goodwill $5 lawnmower, and I would just randomly walk up to people's yards and say, "Your lucky day, for $10, I'm going to mow your grass." And for 2 years, I literally just found a way to eat and put on 35 pounds, because all I could afford was like generic mac and cheese and top ramen, right? It's a little bit pasta heavy as a diet. And then one thing led to another, and here we are 35 years later.
That story it's very similar that I've had a discussion with from some of my other guests, that the majority of people end up moving out here. We know Vegas is a big melting pot of all diversity, all culture. But everyone knows there's a lot of opportunity out here. That's why everyone goes out here. And sometimes it's a little bit tough to get into the industry, to get on the strip or wherever it is that surrounds that area. So people have to make living and make what's due, take on multiple jobs. But once you get into the industry and you find your niche, it's very easy, if you show effort and courage, to work your way up to the top and make your stamp onto Las Vegas.
That's right. That's been my experience. Mm-hmm. That has been my experience. And I can't imagine, if you had told me then what I would be doing today, not only could I have not planned it, I couldn't have conceived it. I mean, there would have been absolutely nothing in my brain that would have allowed me to compute, leave alone declare, what I'd be doing today. And so now I am minutes away from turning 60. And that's what I tell my kids is, don't spend too much time declaring a specific set of goals, because your own thinking is so small, so much smaller than what the universe has got in mind. And so instead, just wake up every day being the best version of yourself you can be, naming and claiming those native gifts, managing the volume, right, so that they're showing up in a way. And it all works out. Opportunities reveal, pathways, cross people, it just all shows up in ways that you could never, like, so much more interesting than anything I could have put together as my plan, right?
Yeah, it's just like that famous Bill Gates quote where he says that we overestimate what we could do in 1 year, but we underestimate what we can do in 10. The world evolves at such a fast rate. That's why I've said this on the podcast a few times, that when we're in school, they always ask us, like, what do we want to be when we grow up? And I think it's a very antiqued question, because the world changes at such a fast rate. You're like, I don't even know what the world's going to look like in 10 years to understand that ideology. So it's
that we've all been asked that question, right, when we're coming up. And I used to just sort of look at the person that was asking me the question, size up what they wanted me to say, and then give them the answer. Right? And so if I was talking to an attorney, I'd be like, the law is really interesting. I'm contemplating the law. And I get a positive response. So I was like, that was a useless exercise in terms of life planning. And I think we do a real disservice actually to kids, or to anybody, to say, what are you going to be? Because that presumes some ability to read the future. You have no idea. Mm-hmm. Right? It presumes some ability to inventory all the options. We have no idea. And it also takes the focus away from the one thing that is our superpower, which is to, like, in this moment right here, what am I doing? Am I showing up with what I've got to the best of my ability? If I'm showing up that way, I do right things and right things happen.
It's true. So I actually do have an interesting question going back a little bit to earlier conversation before we go ahead. I know you work with a lot of kids. You're on a bunch of different committees. You had your own college experience. With that in mind, talking about discovering our native talent and how that kind of question is outdated. Do you think that transitions well into the college university model? Because now college and universities are getting a little bit more flack because sometimes it like puts people in silos and boxes people in, and how the world advances with automation and all these different technologies that it really does prevent people from kind of aspiring to their true potential. Do you think that college framework is still the same? Do you think it's a little bit outdated, or that people should go outside of college if they think that's not right?
Yeah, I think education is, I think we need to redefine what we mean by education, right? Used to be in a country that was largely industrial, right? It used to be that time was a constant. You do 12 years of school, you may do another 4, and whatever you merged with was enough to keep you productive and successful for the next 30 years. So it worked. So education was a process with a terminus, and that terminus then launched you into whatever your sort of place in the middle class was going to be for 30 years. That is not the world in which we live today. It just isn't, right? And yet we're sort of still clinging to the same answers that are completely irrelevant in a world that is now moving very quickly. And so today for me, there is no such thing as an educational experience with a terminus, right? Every time I get a new iPhone version, I got to learn, right?
Yeah.
Anytime there's another frontier in technological exploration, I need to learn. And so it is no longer for me the case that there's anything that says education prepares me for the rest of my life. It never will, right? We've got to just become lifelong learners as we go. And there's going to be certain times, probably when we're younger, to say, let me just go a little bit heavier on getting sort of muscle built around this one skill, right? And so I do see that there's value in certificate programs, in community college programs, in private, 1 year, 2 year, 6 month. I get a certificate that are then stackable. I can add on my certificates to do whatever that thing is that I want to do. Or, my father was a professor, and he would say to us that the value of a college education isn't in what the diploma declares you know. The value of a 4-year degree is in the mind conditioning and building the muscle that is your brain, right? It's 4 extra years at the gym. And so it's about getting curious and critical thinking and all of those things. And so that's never going to be captured in a 6-month certificate program, right? Mm-hmm. Or a 1-year certificate program. So there's tremendous benefit to all learning. And for me, education now needs to not be a terminus-oriented sort of sensibility. It needs to be I'm going to be learning my whole life. And sometimes it means I'm going to be formally engaged in some program because that's what's going to be required for me to learn the thing I need to learn. And at some point in my life, I may go to the gym for 4 years and do a 4-year degree because I want to be exposed to different ways of thinking, different ways of incorporating information. I mean, that's the muscle that you build. And Dad used to also say that one of the benefits of college, and it certainly was for me, was that it was an opportunity to discover the depths and heights of my own self-motivation. Right? In high school, people chased me down if I didn't show up. And all of a sudden I'm in university and they could care less and I'm paying money for it, right? And so it was good. I learned a lot about self-discipline. I learned a lot about managing deadlines, sort of doing it myself without having people. That's incredibly beneficial. In my major, special ed was the degree. The major was psychology. The things that I learned are so useful to me today, right? But I don't think anymore that it makes sense to look at it like, if I just sort of slog it out to get to some terminus, I'm going to be good for the rest of my life. It just doesn't work that way.
Yeah, I think the university model, how I've experienced it, I kind of catered more towards the social experience. You mentioned that you were in a sorority. I was in a fraternity, so that fitted me really well. And I went into college to study kinesiology because I didn't really know what to study. So I was just like, the most practical application would be to major in myself and see how it can be used in the real world. But I do like that you said like trade schools and specialized programs, because the internet has pretty much all information that we need nowadays. YouTube University is the number 2 search engine in the world. I set this podcast up 5 months ago, and I've learned everything through YouTube, probably about 95% of what is needed. So I think now that those schools and educations should emphasize a little bit more on the social experience, especially with remote schooling now, and that sense of like camaraderie that people need with so that it doesn't develop into some sort of like social anxiety or like social awkwardness.
Nothing. I mean, there's real benefits, right? The social capital that one builds through a college experience, you can't get anywhere else, right? Those are lifelong friends that then become, you sort of grow your careers together. So it becomes, you got a nice network going in. So there's a lot of benefits. The value of critical thinking, especially in a world overwhelmed by information, right? I am so grateful for that extra time that I spent in the gym building my brain. Mm-hmm. I think it makes me less vulnerable to be a lemming, right? It makes me more capable of being curious on my own, incorporating different perspectives on my own, and then arriving at what I believe about things, right? I mean, I see a lot in this country today where that isn't the case, and we're taking it sort of at face value from one source. And that ain't good for us, right? As we can see in our nation today, it ain't good for us.
Yeah, that's when you become a lemming and you only see life through one lens. That's where you get fixated on CNN, Fox, and some of these more entertainment news instead of expanding outwards and following a bunch of independent journalists and getting different perspective, because I think that's what's really important, because as we know, influence is very strong in this world, and the influence is only becoming stronger with the rise of social media influencers. And before social media, the only real influencers were either political figures or like your boss at work, right, or maybe your family. But now you can be influenced by anyone in so many different facets and ways that you're being influenced in subconscious ways.
So you've got to have the intellect to be able to manage that, or you're vulnerable, right? Mm-hmm. And so I do think that one of the benefits of some kind of higher education is it gives you more capability to manage the barrage of information that is very true and frankly a benefit of technology. It's also a bit of a challenge in technology, right?
Yeah, it is. And so when you learned all of these techniques along the way, earlier you said you finally, after 2 years, had got a job onto the Strip, and obviously, I stated in the beginning, you helped build MGM into one of the top, most diverse companies in the United States. Can you take us along that journey, making your way to the top?
Yeah, so there's a chapter in between where I first got a job in a tour and travel company. And so my buddy that used to run IT, we would hang out at the water cooler like employees do, and we'd be like, oh, we could do this so much better than the bosses. That's the conversation at the water cooler. Well, the thing about him and I is we actually decided that we should do it. So we ended up starting a little company that was tour and travel. And that was back in the day when we just had little room blocks with the hotels. And it was, you had to really work hard to fail in business, like, because it was just the go-go. Those were the go-go years. Everything was just red hot, white hot. And so we had immediate success with this little business. I ended up buying him out. So 5 years, the business was just going gangbusters. There was like 17 or 20 employees. And I was just really bored because that has never been my passion, right? It's kids, community, those have been my passion. And so at some point the employees said to me, you're really bored. You should go give back. Go do we got this, right? And so I did. And I was 28, 29, maybe. I was young. And had this like very successful business, and still had a whole lot of you're not good enough tape playing in between my ears, right? Which is never very productive. And so as I started to foray into the community and got asked to participate on boards and committees before they could change their minds, right? I was like, oh God, they don't know that I don't know what I'm doing. Before they change their mind, I better say yeah. So overnight, I ended up on like 16 different boards and committees.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and I'm here to tell you that there is a point at which it's not good for you, right? And so the end result was that I took my eyes completely off the business. And when you do that, balls fall. If you're not looking at the ball at all, it will fall. And so then I went through the experience of a failed business. And it was actually one of the it was a treasure of a lesson. In retrospect, it was awful going through it. But I've said this publicly, that I will forever appreciate why people like run in the middle of the night in the face of failure, because the compulsion to do that is so big. But at that point, it occurred to me that if I were to do that then, that would be the second time in my life that I would have been sort of had my only solution to failure to say, oh, let me move and start new, right? And I'd also sort of fallen in love with the community and was pretty active and didn't want to move. And so then the only other option was, I now need to turn and face this thing. And so I did, and I said to the employees, I'm going to go away for a week to try to find some clarity. And then what I will do is I will come back and I will have clarity. That's one thing I promise you. And so for me, the place where I can find clarity usually is on an ocean. And so I went to the Oregon coast and spent a week up there. And there were several clarities, several sort of ahas that happened while I was there. One of those was that my definition of failure and success were such that only one was true at a time, right? And so that made failure such a difficult thing to face, because in my definition, that meant I couldn't then be successful. And so the clarity that came from me is, if I want to live my life in a way that I choose to stretch and take chances, if I choose to trust people that no one else will trust, if I choose to dare to do things that I may not be qualified to do, then one measure of success in my life will be failure, right? Because the alternative is to take no chances and just hug the trunk of the tree, right? And so I don't want to live like that. I want to go out to the skinny branches, right? The fruit is sweeter there, but every once in a while, when you're on a skinny branch, it's going to crack and you're going to fall. And so all of a sudden, this whole notion of either success or failure completely transformed into, hang on, failure should be a measure of a successful life.
Yes, 100% agree.
Big deal. So then I came back and I said to the employees, okay, I got bad news and good news. The bad news is this business is going to fail. The good news is we're going to fail it more successfully than anyone's ever failed it before. And what that meant was, people had paid me money up front for the hotel room that they were going to occupy months down the road. I had that money. And my job was to collect it. I enjoyed the float. And then 2 weeks before arrival, my job was to pay the hotel. So I had cash that I didn't have anymore. So we actually bankrupted the business. I sold everything. And I made a point to, pick and choose the people I paid. And so I went into each of the hotels, and they were being burned by companies like mine all over the place, because it's so easy to collect the cash up front, close up in the middle of the night and disappear. Customer shows up for a prepaid hotel room, and the hotel's got the nightmare to deal with that customer service issue at the front desk, right?
Yeah.
But I went to all the hotels that I had contracts with and said, well, here's the bad news. The company's failing. Here's the good news. I have sold our fax machine and the company car, and I don't have 100 pennies for every dollar that I owe you, but here's 50 or here's 60 cents on the dollar. And if you just accept this, then it means that that client coming in will never know the difference, right? You will know that I'm not going to ditch you completely. And you don't have any issue with that client when they check in. And they were like, seriously? You're actually like, are you serious? Because everyone else was just cutting and running in the middle of the night and sticking it to them. So we did. So we went into bankruptcy court, tied up this little business with a bow. I mean, I stuck it to AT&T for like tens and tens of thousands of dollars because I knew they'd never feel it. But I made sure that the woman that was doing our graphic art stuff, doing our graphics, and she was working out of her den so she could take care of her autistic son. I paid her all $1,900 that we owed her, right? And then what was left. So that's what happened, right? So I felt really good about having failed more successfully than anyone had ever failed before. And now I needed a job, right? Because I'd also personally guaranteed stuff. So there's that practical reality. The bank was all over my case. One of the places that I had become a very active volunteer was the Las Vegas Chamber of Commerce. So at the time that I need gainful employment, there's a director of marketing position that comes available. So imagine, just picture what my resume looks like at this point, right? I have an almost degree in special ed, right? I can mow grass and toss the RJ really well. I can succeed and fail in a business. I've never taken a marketing class in my life. I have absolutely no job that I've ever held that has marketing in it. But you know what? Out of 83 people that applied, they hired me. And the reason that they did is because the 6 people on that little search committee that were making the decision were people I served alongside in some of those other boards and committees. So what they concluded is, you know what, she may not know about marketing, but she kind of tells the truth. What she says she's going to do, she does. She isn't a whole lot of drama to have around. She tends to be a problem solver, tends to bring people together, tends to communicate pretty well. Let's give her a shot. So that was ridiculous, right? Ridiculous. But that's it. All I'd ever done was just do the very best that I could in the moment that I was in, right? And I ended up as a director of marketing at the Las Vegas Chamber of Commerce. 6 years later, I'm senior VP doing government affairs. I mean, the job just grew while I was there. So now I'm in my mid-30s. And I mean, there was a weekly television show, there was daily radio. It was a very, very public fishbowl, which was fine because as a single person without a fish or a plant, I could work 23 hours a day. And I did, right? I could do it 7 days a week because I did. But when I went to sleep at night, there was still a sense of something is really missing. And at first I thought maybe I was just ungrateful, which is not a good thing, right? And then I realized that, no, I was deeply grateful, like genuinely grateful for the opportunity. There was something really empty inside. And then what became clear, I mean, literally at 35, 36, I did what, in retrospect, I'm going to call my mid-course evaluation, right? So at 18, what was on my list of goals, like what was my life going to be about? And like world peace was super important. And now at 36, I'm like, okay, how you doing on world peace? Well, I'm probably not the world's best hope for world peace, but today I will join my neighborhood watch. And that's the now I've contemporized my list, right? Made it relevant for today. I had like curing cancer was a big deal. At 18, I'm like, well, at 35, I don't own a test tube or a beaker. The world should not be looking to me to solve for cancer. But you know what? I can erase that completely and have absolutely no regrets. But the one thing that was for me not negotiable was at 18, it was going to be a life about kids. And here I am at 36. I'm not in the classroom. I'm not the world's best special ed teacher. I don't have children. That one I couldn't contemporize. I couldn't say, well, if I get a puppy, it'll be good, right? World peace could be neighborhood watch. Needing to be a parent, needing to have kids in my life, there was no way I could settle for if I get enough fish, it'll be fine. And so I had to quit my job because what I came to understand is that the job had grown up around me. It was all consuming. And I was grateful for that. But there was no way I was going to sort of modify the terms, right? And reclaim my life to be able to be a parent. And so I quit my job. And so I went and said, this is going to make no sense because I'm super grateful, all of you leaders that have given me this opportunity. And it's time for me to go because I need to reclaim my life so that I can do this thing that is not negotiable, and that's to be a parent. I need to be a mom, right? And so it was then that I left the chamber, and I intentionally didn't pick what I was going to do next, because what I was going to do next was become a parent. I was going to figure that one out, right? And the job, I knew at that point that I knew how to feed myself, right? Mm-hmm. If I had to mow grass again, I knew I could feed myself. Like that wasn't the problem. And one of the people that called was Elaine Wynn.
Oh.
Yeah, I've heard it made the paper. I've heard that you're leaving. What are you doing? I'm like, I don't know. And so she said, come on over. And that was when I went into the gaming industry. And that was in 1996. And in the first year that I worked there, because I told her through the interview process, she said, why are you leaving the chamber? I'm like, because I don't want to work 7 days a week. I want to have a life. I need to be a mom. And she said, terrific. You just became more desirable, right? Which is pretty cool to hear from a prospective boss. And then she is a Jewish mother. So when I went to work for her, like that first year, she'd be like, come on, where are the babies? Come on. So I did because of her and her sort of nudging and support. I ended up getting a license as a foster parent. By the end of that first year, I had 2 kids. A year later, I had 3. Now I'm up to 4. And so destiny has revealed my family, right? Which is how it happened. And then once I went into work, once I entered the gaming industry for Steve and Elaine, they then were bought out by MGM just a few years after I was there. I got really lucky because Terry Laney was the acquiring boss. And within minutes of meeting him, I had immediate respect for the man and grew to just really genuinely love him. And so he gave me all kinds of opportunities. And then fast forward, when he retired, I left. Because for me, it's about the leader. I need to believe deeply in that leader. And my favorite kind of leaders are ones who are writing their final chapter. I call them legacy leaders. I love legacy leaders because it's their last at bat professionally. So they're not thinking about the next promotion. They get, like, none of that agenda is going on. They tend to be older in their careers and their lives, so they've got wisdom that comes with life experience. They know what they believe. They know who they are. And so for me, the leaders were important. So when Terry left, so did I. And I went to go follow another legacy leader for a few years at NV Energy. And in the meantime, at my kitchen table, my kids were all walking into puberty. And so the clarity that came 2008, December, Christmas of 2008 was, I'm looking at my kitchen table, I've got like 3 ganglion teenagers all walking from middle school to high school. And I was like, you know what? In this next chapter, the kitchen table is where I want to be anchored, not the board of the conference table. And so I went in and actually quit again to get off the corporate track so I could be differently present, which is what I've been doing the last 10 years. It's been almost 12 years where I just do a little of this. I'm still based out of my home. And so that is the story. That is
I'm deeply inspired by that story. Oh my God. The thing that stuck to me most was how you became more desirable because you spoke your mind and your true feelings. A lot of people really suppress that when they're around people who maybe are above them on the job corporate ladder because they don't want to seem different. They want to blend in. But in reality, it's the people that are different are the most desirable ones. And so you worked your way up and you built obviously a very prestigious career within the gaming industry. And then you sought after what you wanted to be as desirable, which was to be your own boss. And that's like the ultimate goal for everyone is to be their own boss, especially now. I think that's even more emphasized and echoed throughout how technology has allowed everyone to kind of be their own walking brand. So what I know you had founded recently, you have Delivering with Dignity, but before that you'd started Punam Mathur LLC, speaker, writer, and trainer. What inspired you to go down that traditional route? Was it just the ability that you're able to scale your native talent, or was there something else kind of behind that?
Yeah, after I left the corporate track, like late in 2008, I didn't know what else to do. So I'm like, oh, you should be a consultant. Like that's what you're supposed to do when you're not employed, you're a consultant, right? That was just so I started a business and that's what it was. And it's still there. And so I do a little bit of consulting. Now when I think I'm going to learn something and actually believe in the people that want to hire me and think it could be fun and I could actually add some value, then I say yes. Otherwise I say no. And I've got this little part-time gig with Elaine running her family foundation, which is nice. And then I can do a bunch of things in the community because I've got time in the free agency to be able to do whatever I want, right?
Free agency. I love that. So as far as the Elaine Wynn and Family Foundation, and now that you're the executive director of it, what does that foundation cover as far as like their niche, and how has that affected you and kind of your perspective, ideals on engaging with the community?
So she, this is like the universe has got mad skills and a delicious sense of humor, right? Remember I said my earliest forever passion were kids, right? Mm-hmm. Never got to do that professionally. Doesn't change that it's still the thing that nourishes me the most. So her primary bullseye in Nevada, she's the president of the State Board of Education. So she is half a century of seasoned wisdom on all things education. The woman knows so much about this. That's why she runs the state board. The bullseye of her family foundation are at-risk kids. So that is what we do. We invest in organizations that are really serving to level the playing field under the theory that's really straightforward. Like every human being has got unlimited potential. and unlimited excellence because we're all a bunch of native gifts, right? What every human being does not have is the same opportunity to express. And so for her, it is about social justice through education. And so that's the stuff I get to work on. Like that's her bullseye, which, right? Universe has got mad skills and
unified perfectionally.
Again, I couldn't have planned it, right? I couldn't have planned it. It's so much cooler than anything my limited thinking would have allowed me to declare or set as a goal. But man, when you just are focused on being the best version of yourself you can be, naming and claiming your native gifts today, you do right things happen. And through the icky parts of life, you're like, okay, this won't last forever. And through the great parts of life, you just say, let me savor it because this won't last forever either. Like nothing stays the same, right? And so that is her bullseye. So that is what we do as a foundation. For her personally, her other massive passion is the arts. She's had a lifelong love affair with the arts. So for me, that has been this awesome new stuff that I get to learn, like the Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater, all kinds of visual art, performing arts. And so it's opened up for me because of our family foundation's involvement with those kinds of iconic arts institutions around the country. I get to learn awesome things from incredible people I never would have met. So those are really the two areas that she focuses on, is all things at-risk youth, particularly related to education, and all things visual, performing arts.
It's beautiful. Especially something that I've always said too was I founded 2 businesses before I started the podcast, and I had an antique store. I had a ticket verification app. I tried to go through authenticity and trust is kind of just my personal ethos, that I try to just see people as who they are. That's why when I do this podcast, I don't edit anything, because I think mistakes are privy to everyone, and it's not necessarily a bad thing if you can own it. But one thing I learned is that if you focus too much on the near future, like maybe 2-3 years, it just encapsulates your mind. And if you fixate on it, it's really all about just getting this project off the ground, getting yourself off the ground. And like I always make the analogy of it's like flying a plane without an engine. It's like once you get into the air, you let it just take you. And that's sometimes that boxing in mentality really flusters people. And it didn't take me until after my first business to realize, all right, it's time to just get this thing off the ground. And that's exactly what happened with the app. And then with this podcast, where I go back to the first episode 4 months ago, and I'm just like, oh man, this is cringeworthy. It's cringy, monotone, and like not able to use the right vocabulary usage. But you have to be vulnerable at times, and then trust in yourself and find those native skills to understand that they will blossom, they will bloom over time. But that is, you have to give yourself time.
Exactly. No, give yourself grace. Absolutely. We are by far our own harshest judges, right?
Mm-hmm.
Human experience. And I'll give you the biology. On any given day, we have between 65 and 75,000 thoughts running through this brain, right? And so I've done the math on how many hours a day I'm awake. It's about 4,000 hours, which is about right? So just even do a little like look in on yourself when you're sitting in your closet in the morning trying to figure out what to wear. And so theoretically, you should just be stuff that's relevant to the picking something to wear. Mm-hmm. And instead, if you just sort of tune in and listen, there's going to be a whole bunch of other that's going to be happening, right? Which is how we roll. So that's the human experience, right? 75% of those thoughts are negative, and 95% of our thoughts are repetitive. And that's the human experience, right? And so if that feels at all like, oh yeah, that's my life, guess what? You're not terminally unique. So let's just acknowledge it, right? It is a messy thing to be me, because I got this little voice right here that just is constantly telling me the ways in which I missed it. Here's how you're not good enough. Here's how you fell short. Here's how you're not perfect. Perfection doesn't exist anywhere. And so if that's my default operating system, I got to do something to pick a new system. And once I pick a new system, I got to practice it, right?
Yes.
So that I'm not being run by my fears. I'm not being run by my own negative self-talk. For me, that's the thing that as human beings, we all got to work on, right? Because once I can acknowledge it, like I'll never change what I don't acknowledge. So just even having an awareness that, oh yeah, this is how it works. Because I'm a human being. I got Ferrari engine brain, that's just moving through at a high rate of speed. 3/4 of all my thoughts are negative. 95% are repetitive. And that is how we roll. It doesn't matter who we are. It doesn't matter how old we are. It doesn't matter how much education we have. It doesn't matter how far. I mean, I've worked with people who we would see as up on a pedestal. But here's the thing. There's no pedestal changes the fundamentals of the human existence.
Yes, 100% agree. It's just humans' primal instinct is that we're irrational human beings, so we tend to try to rationalize things, and that's kind of like where debate and where like
you mess ourselves up. Like, we're too smart for our own good.
Mm-hmm, yeah. So let's get into your newest project, Delivering with Dignity.
Yeah.
I had wrote something down that you guys had delivered around 100,000 meals since.
We're like over 150 now.
150 now. Wow.
It's crazy. It's been awesome. So it was born out of COVID. So it was a hashtag COVID is cool. That's impossible. But here's how it happened, Jake, because the county commission chair, Marilyn Kilpatrick, so she knew that we had lots of seniors, we had lots of vulnerable people, we had lots of poor folks in our community anyway. And as she saw this deadly virus descending, she freaked out because she said, so she called us that, what I don't have is an emergency response to make sure I can get food safely to doorsteps. Because if you think about how, there's a ton of food, right? Mm-hmm. In America, no one's going to die of starvation. We're not that country. But what it does mean is I go to the 3 Square Group grocery giveaway, or I go to get the grab and go meal, or I go to get my free meals at school, right, that my kids are eligible for. So all of it was come and get it. And that's what the commissioner knew, is that we had lots of food that was going to go into overdrive, but it all was come and get it. And so what she knew is with the deadly pandemic, there were people who should not be leaving their house no matter what. And she didn't have an emergency response mechanism to get food safely. So she reaches out and says, I need some help. Got to figure this one out. So I'm like, okay. So I called Elizabeth Blau, who is like the queen of restaurants. I mean, she's not very old, but she's got like 35 years experience. So she really knows what she's doing. And then Julie Murray and I co-founded 3 Square like 15 years ago. So that's like sisters from another mother. And so we, collide with Elizabeth. And what we decided was, okay, how are we going to do this? So we're like, okay, where should the food come from? And as we were careening into COVID, what became really clear is that our independently owned restaurants were going to die. Right. It was going to be devastating. And they're small businesses. I mean, these are your neighbors, my neighbors. We need to keep them alive. Mm-hmm. So we made a decision to pay $6 per meal to individually owned restaurants so that we could keep their payroll intact, so we keep them alive. So that's what we've done. And we've got 5 independently owned restaurants that we've literally kept in business through COVID. And then the next question was, okay, who's going to take the food? Like, how will it get delivered safely to doorsteps? And what we know about hashtag Vegas Strong is we are one loving community.
Yes.
If you can make it really simple for people to express their compassion, they're going to say yes. And so we have volunteers every week. There's between 100 and 150 volunteers. And we deliver Monday through Friday those meals. It's at 11:30 at one of those 5 restaurants. So they show up at 11:30. They've got an app that's got their route on it. Oh. They load up the meal bags. The restaurant loads them up safely into their cars. And, they're going to drive for an hour and a half and just complete each task on the app. And so all of that was going to be done by volunteers. And then the third part of it was, okay, how are we going to know who needs it? Like, who are these most vulnerable people? And we thought, well, wait a minute, we've got awesome nonprofits who serve these clients day in, day out, whether it's the Juvenile Diabetes Association or a senior serving organization or Aid for AIDS of Nevada or the Gay and Lesbian Center. They all have relationships, so they know who these people are. So we're going to just trust them, right? So collaboration means we trust each other. I don't double check. I don't look over your shoulder. I say, if you tell me that they're triple threat and most vulnerable, we're going to deliver a meal 2 days later. So we've got roughly 40 of these nonprofit community angels that are doing extraordinary work. And every time they identify one of their clients that has desperate need for meals served, they're going to input their name into the system. 2 days later, we're going to deliver 3 days worth of food at one time, keeping the restaurants alive, driven by volunteers, and we're serving people. So it's just been this awesome thing. And then the one last piece of it that fell into place in ways that you couldn't have planned, right? Was as we figured out the system, how we wanted to do it. The problem was the logistics. Like it's going to take, there aren't enough like Post-it notes in different colors to manage the logistics of something like that, especially as you scale. So then boom, I get a call from a venture capitalist friend of mine who's got this little company, Silicon Valley based company that she's invested in. She says, talk to them because they've, for the last 5 years, picked up bulk food from restaurants and delivered it to a nonprofit. So they care about hunger. They care about doing good in the world. They're really good at this. They're doing it in 270 cities around the country. Why don't you call them? So I call them. It turns out the founder of that company was raised in Las Vegas.
Small world. Always like that.
And as we were trying to get this thing solved for the commissioner early March, she happened to be in Las Vegas visiting her family. So that company is called Copia. So all of these systems work because they sit on top of a technology platform that manages all the logistics, which is why we've been able to go to 150,000 meals here, why we were able to replicate in the Reno Sparks area, why we were able to replicate again in Orange County, California, because there's a plug-and-play component because of the logistics, the platform. So the model is the model. You can pick restaurants that you want to keep alive in any community. There's triple threat clients in every community that nonprofits know. There's volunteers that are going to make it happen. So it's really been an amazing adventure. And we originally thought we were going to do it for 2-3 months, and then we would in July have this big unplug it party. And now what's become clear is in a post-pandemic world, there's always going to be need to have prepared meals delivered safely to doorsteps. And so that's sort of the sad reality. And Clark County just gave us $1 million grant.
Wow.
Yeah, which means that we're going to be here for the foreseeable future.
That's great. That was actually my next question was, would it last in a post-pandemic world? But we know Vegas, it's plagued by a lot of poverty areas. I had a woman on from the Just One Project a few months ago.
Was it Brooke?
I didn't have Brooke. I had my friend Andrea Martinez. She's the director of operations. I went to high school with her, but she came on and.
An amazing organization.
Yeah, amazing. And yeah, she talks about the pop-up and give, which I'm supposed to go to next month. I was going to go this month, but it didn't work out. And I grew up on the east side of Vegas too. And it's just an area where it's had trouble trying to get out from what it's plagued by with being in the poverty area. So I'm assuming that's the area. And there's other areas in Vegas as well. But it's always in need of assistance, especially when mothers and fathers are working 2 jobs and the kids are at home and they try to go to school and make success out of their life to get out of this area. There's so many variables that come to it, even outside of putting a pandemic all on top of it, where everyone's kind of boxed in at home. So it's amazing.
We got a lot of people in need, that is for sure, and that's not going to change anytime soon. As we now are starting to see some of the permanent kind of layoffs that are happening in the industry, the worst is still to come.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, especially with cases are rising. I'm having some nurses that I had on in the beginning of the show. I started the podcast right in the middle of the pandemic. My first 2 guests were nurses, and they actually ended up both contracting COVID. And so I'm bringing them both back on, and we're going to talk about where we see. Or from their perspective, what's actually happening. One works in the ICU unit, one works in the ER unit, and they've told me that it's actually like not as good as people make it out to be. And one of them's been in the news recently, but it just goes to show that there is a lot of things that even go under the radar in Las Vegas that need a lot of attention, whether it's food, health, economics. So many different things. So I admire this project a lot, and it actually served multiple purposes outside of just getting people in need. You kept people having a job. You had a VC person that helped with it to apply their technology on top of it. So this is serving a handful.
We refer to it as this like awesome smush of private, nonprofit, government. Like it just was this. It's actually one of the most innovative things I've ever had the good fortune of being a part of. And then one of the things that Elaine says to me a lot, which I've thought of so many times as we've gone through this journey, was you can't beat a good idea even with a big stick. Isn't that great?
It is. That is.
that's just how it's been with this thing. Is we raised almost $1 million in private money, and our theory from the very beginning was to have it be sustainable. We really need to braid the private dollars with government dollars, and if we can do that, then we know that we can. There's generous people, but they want not to pay for the whole thing. They're, if I can go to a private funder and say, listen, your 50 cents becomes $1 to help people in need. It's a good deal for government. It's a good deal for philanthropists. And so that was always our theory of action. And it was just this last week or two that we finally sort of got the big yes on the government stuff. So now it's sustainable because it's about half and half.
Yes, that's actually an ideology that I had Meredith Spriggs on here the other day. She runs Caridad, the homeless outreach, and she emphasized that they needed to get private dollars into it because the government, they'll put up this large sum of money, but it's kind of ineffective when it's run by those big institutions. But when things get privatized and specialized, that's when they figure it out completely. There needs to be a big unison.
You just got to braid the money because that's going to give you a stronger strand of sustainable service, which is the promise that people you're serving deserve, right?
Yeah, especially. So before we get out of here, I always ask 2 questions, but there's actually another question that I have right before that is I wanted to get your opinion on where do you think Vegas is headed over the next year to year and a half? Do you think the tourism industry recovers swiftly, or do you think that the city bands together and bridges and builds something else outside of that?
I think we've got a lot more pain for the foreseeable future. And I wish I could say something different. I just can't. It's going to be a long time. The days that we experience are gone forever. Because no matter what happens to COVID-19, we have now crossed the Rubicon into a post-pandemic world. And so a place that fundamentally exists to bring large groups of people and encourage them to lose their inhibitions in a post-pandemic world can't be the same, right? And so that we've known from the beginning. I think none of us were quite sure as to whether it was going to be paying for 2 years or 3 years. I think that's probably closer to the horizon of time. So we're not talking months, we're talking years. And so I think there's going to be a lot of changes. I mean, people are going to move to go wherever the jobs might be. There's going to be lots of folks that will be challenging themselves to figure out what their next skill set, right? How can I now use my native gifts and go into some educational moment to upskill myself to be relevant? It's a lot of pain.
Yeah, that's what I was afraid to hear. But I know that Vegas especially, I mean, it's built on tourism, so it's going to be one of the most hit cities in the U.S., but it always finds a way to revolutionize itself every few decades.
We can innovate. That's one we've always innovated out of our mess, whether that mess was 9/11, the Persian Gulf, the Great Recession. I mean, we've innovated our ways out of a lot. This one's going to be more challenging because there's so much that's beyond our control, right? It's a global pandemic. It's not a situational thing. And so we're reliant on international travel. We're reliant on places, And so this whole global pandemic thing makes it a layer of complexity that is going to challenge even us. And what we know is that in the longer term, we will innovate our way out of it. Because we always do.
Vegas strong, hits home all the time. So, last 2 questions. They're the 2 same ones that I asked to everybody. The first question is, the year is 2030. What does the ecosystem of, I'll just put you, I usually use a business, but I'll say, what does the ecosystem of Punam Mathur look like?
2030?
Yeah, I just like, we did say that it's hard to predict, but I like to see what people's creativity and like long-term vision for themselves are.
Yes, I'll be 70. So I'm like, let me just say, yay, I'm still around. And we'll have, kids that are just barely walking into adultification. They will be like full-on adults. So that makes me really excited. I hope that this period of time that is going to now continue to be sort of a pivotal moment in all that is racial conscience in this country, by 2030, that we're going to get to another plateau. And just as the civil rights movement for 150 years has been sort of defined by plateaus and pain spots to get to plateaus, I hope that the pain is behind us and the plateau is there.
Yes.
And those would be my big ones.
I like
that we
that.
love a little more. That we love a little more.
I like that. And the most sentimental one is, what does Las Vegas mean to you?
It's home. It's home.
I like that. Full and foolproof. How can all the listeners get involved with you, all of your projects, and follow along social media?
So I suck at social media, so that's going to be awkward. I'm a baby boomer. I don't need to master that. You know what? Here's what I would challenge everybody is, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, whoever you know, just do a little bit more. Just do a little bit more, right? To get through this, it's going to be, if you can give hope to that stranger just by giving them eye contact that's like real, then do it, because that may be exactly what that person needs, right? If you've got the ability to give $1 and maybe make it $2 for whatever it is that you care about. I don't much care what you care about. I just want you to care. I want all to do a little bit more, because if we do a little bit more, we can actually maybe, just maybe, not leave anybody behind.
Show your passion, emphasize it to the world. It's there. Let it out.
That's right. Jake, you're awesome.
I thank you for this conversation. It's very meaningful. I'm very and deeply inspired by you, your mission, and your story. So appreciate you.
I am by yours, Steve, as I am by, and let's hear it for your really fancy headphones. You got the thing, the mic there. Like, that's a professional.
Mama, we made it. That's kind of my phrase.
So, thank you, Jake. I
thank you for this, and all the listeners out there. Thank you for staying through to the end, and we'll catch you next time.